And welcome into the locker room with Gerhard Mathingani. I'm Chase Robinson. Another week, another show here, and we got a good one lined up for you today. And we'll start by talking college football. Last week we told you about the national championship games. JSU played on Saturday against North Dakota State for the FCS National Championship, and Alabama faced off against Clemson in a great game Monday night. But let's start with JSU Saturday. A tough loss for the Gamecocks, but they played what a great team they played, North Dakota State.
We talked about it all week long about the factor that they've been there 5 times and just how much that would play into it. And you saw a team that was poised, that was focused. JSU by no means played their best game. But I think that you have to credit a lot of what the Bison did offensively and defensively to that. They started Carson Wentz. We talked about, do you go with the hot hand with the freshman quarterback, or do you go with Carson Wentz? And I think he showed us the reason why he's a first-round NFL draft pick, possible kind of player. He had the arm, he had the running ability, and when JSU had that second turnover and that third turnover, you realize that this team that they were playing, it was just playing at a little different level that the Bison were, and JSU just wasn't as sharp as they needed to be. And you can't give a team like North Dakota State 4 possessions and expect to win the game. And I just think that all those things just kind of came in and it all converged in as one, and that's the result that we ended up getting. Carson
Wentz, he's been out for six of the last games with a broken wrist. How do you come back like that and have such a great game?
He's just an unbelievable talent. I'm just so impressed by the way he's able to throw the football. Also the way he's able to collectively poise himself for the team. And one of the things that I thought about was, he hasn't taken a lot of the reps. The freshman, Easton Clark, took a lot more of the reps during the week going into that game and also into the semifinal game. And he just seemed to me that he has that gamer mentality. And there was 2 passes, especially on third down there in the first half, where you realized the difference that he made in the game. And then there was a run that he had for a touchdown that you saw in the highlights just a moment ago. He ended up having 79 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. And I think it's just that he's the ultimate gamer who's been there before, who had the confidence of his team and the confidence of his head coach, and they went out and proved it. And then they capitalized on all of JSU's mistakes.
For JSU, what a season it's been for them.
For sure.
One of the greatest, I've seen in the past, for a long time at JSU.
For sure. Yeah.
Gross has done a great job and great players to surround themselves. What's next for JSU?
I think they take that another step forward, because if you follow this team all this past year, what they said was the Sam Houston State loss in the second round last year fueled us. And so it fueled them back to another OVC championship. It fueled them back to a win over Sam Houston State, and then it fueled them into the championship game. Now we'll see if this JSU team can refocus, because they have a lot of pieces coming back. They do graduate 29 seniors. Let's congratulate the seniors on a very, very fine career, and not to diminish the fact that they will lose a lot of talent. But will this game create that same hunger that last year created and be able to build on it next year, and then hopefully be able to slay that last giant in North Dakota State, because I know for a fact that's who they'll be gunning for next year.
But we'll be interested to see them next year. Congratulations to JSU on this fine season. Here's what Coach John Gross had to say after the national championship on Saturday.
You're talking about a program 3 years ago that had not won a FCS playoff game, and to be sitting in the national championship game is where our dreams and goals were, and we got here and we just didn't play very well and we lost the game. So our goal will still be the same: is get back here, but we want to win.
On Monday night there was a huge game, Alabama and Clemson, one of the best national championship games I've ever seen.
Yeah, it goes right up there with that USC-Texas game a little while back with Vince Young, and Deshaun Watson for Clemson played a lot like Vince Young. But let's pause everything real quick and let's talk about what Alabama was able to do in that game. I think what we saw out of Alabama for the first time is you saw a team that kind of did what they did all year long, and then they added these wrinkles in that nobody expected. When you talk about things like the onside kick, and you talk about the kind of things that O.J. Howard did in the game, he hasn't dominated a game like the way he did on Monday night. I just think that Clemson physically matched up a lot better than I thought they would have going into the game. Deshaun Watson was clearly the best player on the field, but Alabama was the best team on the field, and everybody got a great game out of it.
That onside kick, nobody was expecting it.
Oh, for sure.
That's something you don't usually see Nick Saban roll the dice on.
Fourth quarter, 24-24, and Nick Saban takes that shot. and you look at it and you just start to smile, and he smiled right afterwards. And it's one of those defining moments where when people want to diminish what Nick Saban has done, oh, he gets 5-star athletes, he gets 5-star recruits, he prepares well, but he also just has a feel for the game that I think is really underrated. He just has a feel and a pulse for the game, and I heard exhaustive talk about all the decisions leading up to that, how they saw it after the first kickoff, then the second, then the third. There were 3 different scores. That 24th point was the 4th kickoff they had. They saw 3 different times we had this look. He took a calculated risk. It's not just some fly off the cuff, just riverboat gambling kind of deal. It was just a nice calculated risk, and that's what Nick Saban does. He has a feel for the game, then he executed, or he didn't execute, his players executed. What a great kick by Adam Griffith. Probably even better play by Marlon Humphrey, just catching it right in the breadbasket. And then I think the part that kind of gets washed over in this whole thing is the guts to call the play, and then for Lane Kiffin to dial it up and finish off the drive with a great touchdown there with O.J. Howard.
What a great game there for Alabama. And Coach Nick Saban, he's talked so much about this team and how special they are. And here's what he had to say after the national championship.
I told him, this is how do you want to be remembered? We always talk about playing 60 minutes, but this is a 60-10 game. It's a 60 minutes of the game, and then the 10 minutes in the locker room after the game that you remember for the rest of your life, and what you accomplish actually even transcends your life, because they put a plaque up that this team won the national championship. And the 1926 team, who I'm sure most of those players are not around anymore, they still have a legacy.
And when we come back after this break, we'll talk some high school basketball, so stay with us in the locker room. Back here in the locker room, and it's time to talk some high school basketball in the meat of their schedule right now as we're getting into January and area play. So let's take a look at our East Alabama Power Poll for high school basketball. Let's start with the girls. At number 1, of course, Anniston still on a roll. Spring Garden at number 2. Gadsden City at 3. Sachs at 4. Pleasant Valley at 5. They're having a great season so far. Jacksonville comes in at number 6. Piedmont at 7. Ohatchee at 8. Boaz at 9. And the Oxford Yellow Jackets at 10. Let's take a look now at the boys' power poll. Of course, Sacred Heart sitting at the number 1 spot, as they do in the Class 1A in the state of Alabama. Gadsden City at number 2. Anniston, big win over Alexandria last night. They're at number 3. Cherokee County at number 4 bumped Alexandria up to 5. They had a win over Anniston last week, and they've been on a roll lately. So Alexandria Valley Cubs at number 5. Talladega at number 6. Westbrook Christian stays at 7. White Plains 8. Sachs at number 9. And Oxford at number 10.
Yeah, it should be a really interesting county tournament. You talked about some of the games already matched up in the county. We'll dive deep into the county tournament as well. But with as many county schools that are in the top 10, we'll start to see those things flesh each other out. And then I'll be interested to see when Gadsden City and Anniston hook up together and some of these other matchups right before they enter the meat of their area schedules. So we'll see a lot of the teams like Westbrook Christian and like Boaz on the girls' side, how they do in the meat of their area schedule as we look ahead to the playoffs a bit later.
Yeah, I don't think any really big surprises, and that power poll looks pretty consistent. A little bit of changing here and there from what you originally did several weeks ago. So good, strong teams in our area this year. Again,
the Calhoun County Basketball Tournament, it begins this Saturday and goes all the way to the next Saturday. So let's take a look now at the matchups of round 1 of the Calhoun County Basketball Tournament as we start with the girls. On Saturday, Faith Christian, the 13th seed, will take on White Plains, number 12. At Donahoe, we'll take on Weaver in the first round. Donahoe, the 14th seed, Weaver 11th. And JCA and Sacred Heart will play in round 1 as well. In round 2, the Oxford Yellow Jackets will take on the number 9 seeded Welborn Panthers. And then we'll see the number 5 seed Piedmont take on the winner of Faith Christian White Plains. Ohatchee, the number 6 seed, will take on the winner of Donahoe and Weaver. And Alexandria, the 7th seed, will take on the winner of JCA and Sacred Heart. And the quarterfinal round will see the top 4 teams. They'll make their debut in the quarterfinal round of the county tournament. Number 1, Anniston will take on the winner of Oxford and Welborn. Number 4, Pleasant Valley will take on the winner of either Piedmont, Faith Christian, or White Plains. and Jacksonville will take on either Ohatchee, Donahoe, or Weaver. And the number 2 seeded Sacs Wildcats will take on either Alexandria, JCA, or Sacred Heart.
Lots of compelling matchups here, and I think one of the interesting things that the Calhoun County tournament does is that they don't have it all 1 through 16, and you get a lot of those blowouts. And so what we'll be able to see is a lot of the matchups, especially in that first round, the second round, where teams that are the lower seeds that will be able to get into the second round by virtue of the way that the seeding is set up. And so you have a lot of intriguing second round matchups, especially that 8-9 matchup in really every tournament, Calhoun County tournament. That's one of the more intriguing matchups because you get a good game in the 8-9, and then you get to see who gets to challenge the number 1 team. And the number 1 team, a lot of times we talk about how the rest versus rust thing, they don't play until Wednesday or Thursday. And so it'll be interesting to see how those things line up against some of the top dogs. But I'm really interested to see, on the girls' side especially, Pleasant Valley. It's a team that we don't normally see here. They now get the double bye. We'll see how they do.
Yeah, and of course, everybody's looking up at Anniston. We knew that going in. We knew that when the season started. Very strong team for Coach Eddie Bullock, so obviously they're kind of the cream of the crop. But Gerhard's right, the layoffs are an issue because those top seeds will have to use their practice time wisely, not do too much, not do too little, whatever that right balance is, I guess.
You know, even for the ones at the bottom, you know, the lower seeds, they're getting to play lower seeds as well. And it's hard, you know, if you play Saturday and lose, you have to take a whole week off. No games,
Yeah,
just
you can't
practice.
schedule any games.
So it's hard for them, and if they win, they'll get a second round game on Monday. So that'll be interesting there. Let's take a look now at the boys' first round matchups. Round 1 for the boys, number 13 Welborn takes on number 12 Faith Christian. Donahoe and Pleasant Valley, round 1. And the number 10 seed Ohatchee takes on number 15 Jacksonville Christian. Also, round 2, Piedmont and Jacksonville will play. That'll be a great game. Then you'll see number 5 Oxford take on the winner of Welborn and Faith Christian. Number 6 Alexandria take on the winner of Donahoe Pleasant Valley. And the 7th seed, the Weaver Bearcats, will play the winner of Ohatchee and JCA. And here is the top 4 in the quarterfinals. They'll make their debut. The Sacred Heart Cardinals will play the winner of Piedmont and Jacksonville. Sacs will either play Oxford, Welborn, or Faith Christian. The number 3 seed White Plains Wildcats will take on Alexandria, Donahoe, or Pleasant Valley. And the Anniston Bulldogs will take on either Weaver, Ohatchee, or JCA there in the quarterfinals.
Not to put the cart before the horse, but one of the things I'm really interested in seeing is if Piedmont does beat Jacksonville and Piedmont, the 8 seed, plays Sacred Heart, the 1 seed. This is 2 teams that were in Birmingham last year. And it's an interesting quarterfinal matchup. And we talked about how Sacred Heart is kind of the team to beat, the team that everybody's gunning for, the number 1 seed. And clearly the number 1 seed with the level of basketball they've played and the competition level they've played. And to see what the Cardinal do leading up to the game, but then also to see what Anniston, White Plains, and Oxford have to say, because I think Mickey said it a couple weeks ago that the gap between Sacred Heart and everybody else is kind of like when Tiger had his run, where it's just you're going to take Tiger over the field, and it's seemingly now where this is the time where everybody else can play catch up. So it's interesting to see who will be that team to do so later on.
Yeah, when you look at that, that's a great graphic to show there, because you see all those 4 boys seeds could face very interesting matchups.
Right.
You know, you got Sacred Heart, as Gerhard mentioned. What if it's Jacksonville that beats Piedmont? Well, could Cam Horton and Jacksonville give Sacred Heart a scare?
Right.
You know, you've got White Plains may wind up having to play Alexandria.
Right.
You know, that would be tough. You know, Anniston and Weaver, that would be an interesting game. Can Sacs hold off Oxford as the 4th seed versus the 5th seed? Some very interesting games that are going to take place in that time period of the tournament.
You know, Gerhard and I were talking off camera just a little bit ago about our county tournament. It's different from most people's. It's special. You have 1A through 7A. You have area, city school, county school, private school, all playing in one tournament, which is totally different from anybody else.
Yeah, and then we also talked about just the quality of basketball. So not only do you get the interesting dynamic of all these teams playing, you get good quality basketball. And the number 1 team in the county on the boys' side is the small school, one of the small schools in the entire state of Alabama. And so you just add this intrigue with this tournament. And then the fact that, you know, just take last year alone, the Sacred Heart boys, the Jacksonville girls, the Piedmont boys, the Anniston girls, not only played at Piedmont Coliseum for this tournament, but also played in the regional, and then all went on to Birmingham and had a chance for a state championship. I just think that all those elements combined make the Calhoun County tournament really special.
Yeah, I'm a little older than you guys, so I've seen a lot of these tournaments. Had the pleasure of playing in it many, many moons ago. But it's interesting because you see now what used to be was a tournament with, Oxford, Alexandria, and Anniston. Those three teams, they were normally the favorite coming in. And then you had the emergence of Sacred Heart now, as Gerhard said, the small 1A that's heads and shoulders above everybody else. White Plains emerging from that small 2A school to being a factor. They've kind of been a factor in this thing the last few years. I remember several years ago they upset Sachs and lost to Anniston in the semis, and that was a big deal that they had gotten that far. Well, now we kind of expect them to get that far every year. So it's interesting how the dynamics have changed over the years. But, you still know Alexandria and Anniston and Oxford are a factor, but it's not just those three anymore.
Right.
And we'll have all of the semifinal and final games right here on TV 24 next Friday and Saturday. We're going to grab a timeout. When we come back, it's the Locker Room Roundtable, so stay with us. Back here in the locker room, and it's time for the Locker Room Roundtable. And after Monday night's national championship game, and a lot of people talking, is Nick Saban the greatest coach in college football history?
6 years ago, 7 years ago, the question itself would have been blasphemy. Sitting here now, 4 championships later, 5 total, I really don't see how you don't put him there. And we talked about the run that he's had with Alabama, only rivaled by Notre Dame with what they did during the World War II era with Frank Leahy. I just think with what Nick Saban has done these days with the changing culture of football, with limited scholarships. You now have 85 scholarships. You don't have 120 scholarships and taking tennis scholarships away from tennis players to make sure your rivals don't get other players. And just some of the other tactics that were not considered appalling back then, which, is completely against the NCAA rules. Now, those things were let go. Also, back then, there were maybe 7 to 10 schools that legitimately had a chance at national championship every year. This year, it's wide open. I mean, Oklahoma State was a couple games away from a spot in the playoff. And you just have all these other outliers. And for the fact that Nick Saban was able to continue to recruit the way he does, at the energy level that he has, and replace coordinators, have different styles and different systems, and still win national championships, Monday night solidified it for me. He is the greatest coach in college football history.
I don't know, but he's obviously a great coach, and he's among the best if he's not the best. And I think what a lot of things have kind of the stars really aligned with this hire when Alabama made several years ago. They were hungry. They were willing to give him the keys. And there's probably not many times in Alabama football history when Alabama has literally said, okay, you can have it. Nobody will question you. And that's hard for people in college football programs to do because a lot of people have their hand in the till. And so that kind of opened the door for him to come in and do what he does best, which is dominate recruiting. He had the tradition and all of that behind him, and he went and got that great first initial recruiting class. And it's just been kind of a snowball. I think the biggest thing to me that's impressive is that he's been able to do it despite the fact that it's hard to stay hungry after you win. And they've had those couple of times they've lapsed because maybe they weren't as hungry, but he seems to get them back. That's what's impressive to me.
What's next for Alabama? Losing quarterback Jake Coker, losing players like Reggie Ragland. What's next for them?
They've changed quarterbacks so many times. I've gotten to a point where I don't worry about quarterbacks. Heck, they were still finding out their starting quarterback going into the Ole Miss game. Cooper Bateman started that game, and that's the last game they lost right before the national championship. I don't think quarterback will be an issue. I think Blake Barnett will have his say, and then, of course, you'll have Alec Morris and Cooper Bateman vying for that job, and then they'll recruit the way they normally recruit. Freshmen usually don't play for Nick Saban. The biggest thing is who will be his defensive coordinator, because for the longest time, he's had a guy who's thought like him, who's recruited like him, who's been on the very same page, very same philosophy. You see the dynamic between Saban and Kiffin. You can't get that guy on defense because that's Nick Saban's quote-unquote side of the ball. We've seen kind of those looks that he gives to Kiffin, and he just kind of gives Kiffin the keys, and then he takes back one of the keys or so. I just think that he has to find a guy that aligns with what he does to call the plays in and out, and Saban doesn't call the plays, but if he finds a guy that aligns with his philosophy and what he wants, I think they'll be okay. And then, of course, they'll recruit just fine, but I'm interested to see the defensive coordinator hire. I'm not necessarily worried about the horses.
I know you didn't ask about the game, but kind of fitting into where Alabama goes from here, there wasn't a big gap in this game like I thought 2 months ago.
Right.
You know, I remember I said on this show back in the fall that I'd be surprised if Clemson scored 14 points on Alabama. I will confess I said that in this chair. Boy, was I wrong. As a matter of fact, if you'd have told me going into that game that the winning team would have a kickoff return, an interception return, an onside kick, I would have thought, well, that's Clemson winning because they're going to have to do those type things to win. It was Alabama that needed that to beat Clemson.
Right.
Interesting that gap wasn't what I thought it was.
Yeah, we talked about at the beginning of the show how physically they matched up, and that's another.
This is an ACC team.
Yeah, exactly. And we've learned all about kind of what the ACC is about. And I think that's another thing with Alabama is that the rest of the world has kind of caught up to them physically, and they need things like that. They're not dominating the same kind of fashion that they were a few years back, and that might be good for Alabama moving forward.
Let's talk about the Auburn Tigers. They finalized their staff this week with people like Herb Hand, Wesley McGriff. What kind of hires are these? Is this going to be great for the program?
It's Herb Hand's a 26-year vet from Penn State. We've talked about it on this show that Auburn needs refreshing, and they need a new juice, and they need a new pump. And I think one of the best things for Auburn is the fact on Monday night, Bama won national championship, because the pressure keeps being applied to every school in the SEC. It's being applied to LSU, to Tennessee, to Georgia, to Florida, to South Carolina, and now right next door to Auburn. And so I think Gus Malzahn had to do what he had to do. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I know Herb Hand as well as anybody, but I think Kevin Steele's a good hire on the defensive side of the ball. Moving Travis Williams from a defensive analyst to the field was solid in recruiting. Now we'll find out what they can bring, because recruiting classes shouldn't be a problem. Auburn's recruited in the top 10 for the last maybe 7 out of the last 10 years or so. So I'm not necessarily worried about the recruiting side of it. It's player development, and if they can get these guys developed the way that Alabama has and Clemson has and some of these other elite teams.
Biggest hire they've made, and I think Steele's a good hire, Hand's a good hire, McGriff's a great hire. Travis Williams going to linebacker coach and actually being on the field every day is going to turn that defense into what Auburn fans have been wanting. Travis Williams is the most underrated coach on that staff. I'll say that right now. And to prove it, they could have hired Kevin Green. Auburn legend, NFL legend, coach with good enough to coach linebackers for the Green Bay Packers, but wasn't good enough to coach at Auburn. Why? Maybe it's because Gus Malzahn sees something in Travis Williams that maybe we can't see. I know a little bit about him, and I know he's going to bring a different attitude to that defense, I think, and he'll be a great recruiter too. That's why he got the job of possibly above Kevin Green.
Exactly, and the fact that they're getting Carl Lawson back, and we'll wait and see what everybody else does, but they're getting that cog of the defensive line back, and if he can work with the linebackers and you can get Carl Lawson up there, they can present a strong united front, much like Alabama's front seven was this year.
It'll be interesting to see. It's hard to believe college football is over for the season. That'll do it for our show today. Hey, join us next week. The AHSAA reclassification is next Wednesday, so we'll be talking all about that next week right here in the locker room, and we'll see you then.